Where's the humanity? Where is the love? You know what I'm saying? You know, you get me? Where is the love? You know, when you're talking about landlords are evicting seniors, I got a call yesterday from a 91-year elderly woman who told me she's being LSAC. 91! And she only gets $861 a month from Social Security. She was in tears talking about she's gonna be homeless because where is she gonna go? A studio today in San Francisco goes for $3,000 a month. That is criminal. Criminal.
What do we want? When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Equal housing.
And when do we want it?
Now.
Desalojos al carajo. Arriba, abajo. 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 Desalojos al carajo. Arriba.
So there are three kinds of no-fault evictions right now displacing San Franciscans. So that means like there are three different ways that landlords can evict folks when they're in the middle of their lease, if they've been paying their rent on time and they're just good tenants. One of those is the Ellis Act, and that's a state law that allows landlords to go out of business and evict tenants whenever they want. But we're finding rather than using that to just go out of business as it was intended in 1986, they're using it as their business model to convert units into condos. And, there's that. There's owner move-in evictions, which is when owners move into units that they own and displace tenants, and then there are demolitions. And because all three of those are considered no-fault evictions, we've been calling on a moratorium on all no-fault evictions. And a lot of politicians are like, oh, we can't do that, the Ellis Act is a state law, blah, blah, blah. But what we were calling for on Tuesday was the mayor to actually intervene and raise a moratorium, which he could do. And I think one of the points we were making was that in the past, San Francisco has kind of gone above and beyond what the state limits and deal limits. And you can see that in the case of gay marriage, queer marriage, it becoming a sanctuary city, different kind of policy shifts that the city has decided to exceed the state around. So that's what we were calling for. I don't know if you think.
San Francisco across the bay, what do we want? San Francisco across the bay, what do we want? San Francisco across the bay, what do we want? San Francisco across the bay, what do we want? San Francisco across the bay, what do we want?
With San Francisco moving towards attracting the tech industry to come to San Francisco, like Twitter as an example, right? They gave them a lot of tax breaks so that they came here. And basically, it was a sweetheart deal, right? Why would they not want to come here when they're going to be saving a lot of money, right? And so, but nobody really looked at the impact that it would make on San Francisco in terms of its residency, right? So all of a sudden you get overnight 1,400 new employees, and they all want to live here. right? So what do? They start looking at around the neighborhood. And of course, the Mission District is the hottest neighborhood. So we got the best weather. We got the best food because you can find not only Mexican, tacos and burritos, but you can find Puerto Rican food, pupusas from El Salvador. You can find Cuban food here. You can find Italian food here, Greek food, all kinds of different foods here because the Mission District is not only in terms of food. As Latinos, we love to eat Chinese food, we're big, in terms of eating Japanese. We love Japanese food. We love all kinds of different foods. So we already have had a very rich community in terms of food because we love to eat. So that coupled with the arts, the murals, Carnaval, el Cinco de Mayo, and just a lot of the richness that throughout decades that we as a community have created in our neighborhood, it made it very attractive for these folks to want to live here, right? So.
So my name is Miriam Zook. I'm a postdoc researcher at UC Berkeley. We're right now in the Center for Community Innovation, and I am managing a project that studies how public investment, especially investment around transit, influences processes of gentrification and displacement. So that's kind of where we're at. That's why I'm here. We've been doing some of the research that we've been doing. We did looked at all sorts of old research on gentrification and displacement, and this is not a new phenomenon or a new term. And in the 70s, there was a huge research project on Hayes Valley because that was a poor neighborhood. So if you think about the end goal, the end of it, I would say that that's been completely gentrified. I don't think of that as a mixed income neighborhood. I don't think about that as a poor neighborhood. So, whether or not for the long term after all of our boom and bust cycles, if that will continue being a middle class or an affluent neighborhood, who knows? I don't think anybody has quite, neighborhoods are not natural phenomenon, right? They're not, so we don't know how they will evolve, and they're not all going to evolve in the same way around time. There's definitely some similarities, but I think if I were to guess that the end product is a more affluent neighborhood in the end, I think that it would be hard for me to imagine, for instance, Hayes Valley going back to becoming a poor neighborhood. But what if poverty increases immensely in San Francisco, something happens and it becomes a majority poor city, then maybe you could see some sort of transition again. I don't know.
San Francisco, within its 45 square miles, is contained one of the most colorful and romantic cities in the world. Approaching from the south, the traveler views with sudden excitement the city thrusting its white towers into the blue California sky. But it is from the east that the city reveals its famous profile, framed by the silver towers of the Bay Bridge.
One, I've lived in San Francisco almost 20 years now and have been a part of the Clarion Alley Mural Project since 1998, which is right in the heart of Mission. And when I moved here almost 20 years ago, it was a very different space, very different community, mostly working class, mostly Latino, and artists, because it was a space that was primarily low and middle income people that lived there. And so, of course, that was also the area that artists would move to because that was all we could afford. And the Clarion Alley Mural Project, the way that that started was it was about community building. So it was a way for neighbors to get to know each other because that wasn't happening in the neighborhood. You know, folks would leave, they would go to work, and you know, you wouldn't really see each other unless you just might pass each other on the street. So the project started by, you know, asking Community Thrift, who had been there for years, if we could use some of the spaces on their building to start painting murals. And they gave those spaces over, and we ended up getting artists to start painting those spaces, and the neighbors started to see it as, oh, you know, this is actually kind of a cool thing. And people would stop, they would talk to each other, and then as time went by, more and more folks on the alley started giving the spaces over to creating murals, and it became a very vibrant community and a space where community did come together. And I would say that that space has not changed. You know, that space still is one of the only spaces I know of in the Mission District, or in that area of the Mission District. I shouldn't say that because there are different areas. You know, you go over to 24th Street and you have Balmy Alley, and that's a completely different community. But, you know, the 16th Street area, really it's almost like you're walking, when you walk down Clarion, is almost like going through some kind of weird time lapse, or, you know, you're walking into a different space. It's almost like it's its own protected space from the from the gentrification that's encroached the area around it. And also walking down Mission Street is still, you know, you still have a feel that is very much like what the Mission has been for many years. But then you see that that's also, you know, the developers are encroaching in on there, and there are a number of development projects that have started to go in along Mission Street that are going to completely change that neighborhood. And what it's going to do is transform that into Valencia Street, so that it all becomes this homogenized, you know, it's all shishi, expensive restaurants and boutique shops, things that don't really speak to the community that's been living there and that exists there.
My name is Jean Yaste, and we are in Clarion Alley in the Mission District in San Francisco, California. I mean, you know, everybody's saying it's, you know, gentrification, which is just like a kind of a word with a bunch of baggage at this point, which really it's just modern day colonialism, you know, it's people coming in that are not from here, trying to displace people that are here without really trying to assimilate into the existing culture. And that's the definition of something known as colonialism, where outsiders essentially come in and push the existing people out. And then they try to use some sort of like value judgments, like, oh, well, they're just brutal savages and they're not sophisticated like us, you know. And then it's just funny because, you know, people would say that, like British people, European people coming here when like the Ohlone Indians were displaced just in the Mission. And then now, you know, you go on Valencia Street and you see all these entitled people sitting at their little cafes on the sidewalk saying things like, ooh, the locals are getting restless, you know, and it's complete parallel. So, you know, and it's also this whole thing, you know, if I could really just oversimplify and short story it, it's like, you know, World War II, suburbia as an experiment, peak oil, it failed, white return, and thus displacement of people that were kind of left in the cities and like forgotten. So now it's the struggle of how to grapple with all that and try to essentially, you know, get everybody's needs met. And really, you know, it's like, people have the right to walk freely of the earth, you know, so whether you're rich or poor, whatever, it doesn't matter. And
know, the 15 to 20% of debate that I was getting into when I was painting the Shame and Solutions mural were people coming up and saying like, oh, well, this is just economics, you know, change is inevitable, and, you know, this, almost kind of like this mentality of like, well, economics is survival of the fittest. And it's not that simple, because, you know, I'm sure that is, you know, the party line of the developers, party line of, you know, these mega corporations, and, you know, mainly is tech, but just the corporations that are being drawn here. And, you know, we're taught to think that way, and we're taught to think in this way that, like, you know, well, free market capitalism always, like, kind of like gives you choices, and then, you know, the best rise to the top. But it's not an even playing field. And so, you know, the city already regulates a lot of things. Like, you know, we don't see semis going through the city. So there's obviously regulation that can happen on what kind of traffic is in the city, and who uses these public bus stops that everybody pays into. And so the decision to have private transportation come into the city for a company that's down in Mountain View, instead of developing Mountain View, instead of Mountain View becoming its own city where people live near where they work, they're living here, and they get these private buses that go on the public roads that we all pay our taxes for. And they have to be approved to do that. So, you know, just on that level, you know, there's a government involved in that decision. You know, there's a planning department. It says what you can build and what you can't build. And, you know, there's equations to figure out what is market rate housing. And, like, that's all done through City Hall. So, you know, we vote in these leaders to actually manage the way our economy and our community works, and by letting these companies or come in, or these developers, whoever it is, come in and change that community, they have to go through City Hall.
I represent District 9 on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which includes the neighborhoods of the Mission, Bernal Heights, Portola. There is no easy answer. I think that you have to do and try to do a number of things. I think that there are short-term things that you can do, and short-term, what we need to do and what we are trying to do is to provide protections for residents of neighborhoods like the Mission, to protect them from displacement, from eviction. So, you know, we have passed legislation to protect tenants from eviction, legislation that does a number of things. You know, it prohibits harassment against tenants. It increases the amount of relocation payments that have to be made if someone is displaced. It addresses some of the speculation that's going on. So short term, we need to do whatever we can to provide protections for tenants who are facing eviction. I think long term, we have to create more affordable housing. We have to give people who are low income, middle income, housing options that they can afford, and that requires that the city make an investment, a long-term investment in building more affordable housing, because until you do that, until you increase the housing stock and increase the stock of affordable housing in particular, you're going to continue to have that problem. One of the challenges that we have, and which is why I think things are so bad, is that the city has seen a lot of construction, a lot of development, but most of that development has been market rate housing that most residents, not only in the Mission but in the city, cannot afford. So, you know, you cannot focus the development on luxury housing that is unaffordable for most people. You have to have development that is affordable for people from different economic, backgrounds. Whether it's low income, but also middle income. Well, I think all of us are affected by displacement in the sense that whether you are the person who is being displaced, and obviously the person who is facing the displacement himself or herself has the most disproportionate effect, right? But I think it also affects the people that are left behind who remain, because it changes the character of the neighborhood. One of the things that's happening with displacement is not only that the individuals and their families are being pushed out, but because that's happening, that's changing the character of these neighborhoods. And someone explained to me that it's really sad that they have lost so many of their neighbors in the last few months because the neighborhood doesn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. In a lot of these blocks, a lot of these neighborhoods, people, know each other. They have, lived together for many, many years. There's a sense of community. Neighbors help each other. And when people are pushed out, even if you're able to stay yourself, when you lose, on your block, a huge percentage of the people who have lived there, the neighborhood takes a different character. It's a different feel, and so clearly displacement, affects disproportionately those that are displaced, but it impacts all of us. And in terms of who is being displaced, you have a lot of low-income people, working-class people, many of them people of color, but it impacts people of all backgrounds, of all walks of life. And what I tell people is, all of us have a responsibility to fight displacement so that we make sure that the mission remains the mission, right? I mean, people who are coming into the mission are moving into the mission because they want to live in the mission. They don't want the mission to turn into something else, right? And unless you actually help the people who have made the mission what it is stay in that neighborhood, the mission will not be, the neighborhood that brought you to it in the first place,